Hey, good morning, everybody. Seems like there's perhaps a little more than a general interest in aviation gasoline these days. Isn't that something? I'm Tom Haynes. I've been covering general aviation as an aviation journalist for 37 years, 34 of them at AOPA until April when I retired. But over the decades, I've written many articles about aviation gasoline, unleaded fuel, how we're going to get there, all that sort of thing. But it's been going on for a long time, a complex problem. How many here fly behind an engine that burns 100 low-lead gasoline? Yeah. It's a big deal. Me too. You know, I've got an IO 550 on my Bonanza, so I'm real anxious for 100-octane unleaded fuel for a whole bunch of reasons, and we all should be, because having lead in our fuel is a real challenge. Let me just do a little bit of a level set here, kind of talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today. Then we've got a full program, including some experts up here. They're going to talk about what's going on from a development standpoint around the fuels and how we get them out into the gas tanks of our airplanes. That then also have some Q&A at the end, so stick around for that. But basically, you know, this has been a complex problem that has been worked for a long time, trying to get lead out of our gasoline, our avgas. We're about the last fuel out there in the world that still has lead in it. And so you can argue all day about how much lead actually gets emitted by airplanes and how important that is or not. But at the end of the day, it's still a toxin. It's still out there. We need to be on the right side of this and get it done. And there are other reasons from a mechanical standpoint, too, where we can actually do better from a maintenance standpoint not having lead in our fuel. So everybody here is hoping to get that done as soon as possible. But there's been a number of programs over the years. The Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative, of course, started a decade or so ago. FA industry program to test a bunch of fuels. Several fuels have been through that, and none of them have emerged with quite the right formulation to get us to 100 octane. More recently, we've had some others going through an STC process outside of PAFI, and they've had some success there with Swift and with GAMI. Swift, of course, has an unleaded 94-octane fuel, which is great for those who have low compression engines. But for those of us who have high compression, who burn the majority of the fuel, by the way, we really need 100 octane. And we haven't quite got to the point where we have an approved fuel yet that does meet that 100 octane standard. And we really want a one solution because general aviation is just too small. Avgas, as it exists today, 100 low lead, is really a boutique fuel. And we can't afford to really bifurcate that by having a lot of unleaded, say 94 octane, and then also 100 octane out there, because it's just the cost, the economics of that just don't make sense. So the ideal solution, of course, is a 100 octane fuel that serves the entire need of the GA fleet. So, of course, as I said, there have been a number of STC projects out there. GAMI, for example, has STCs for the low compression engines for their 100 octane fuel. And they have continued to work to get approvals for the rest of the high compression engines. Swift, of course, is also working on its own 100 octane fuel in development, and the PAFI program is still alive. As you'll hear today, there are a couple of companies still testing through that program with hopefully have a solution out there too. So, but even if we had a fuel available today, 100 octane fuel available today, there's still a lot that needs to be done to transition the entire industry to this new fuel. We've never really done that before. Certainly not in modern times have we transitioned an industry like general aviation to a new fuel. So there's a lot of things behind the scene from an infrastructure standpoint at the refinery level, distribution level, and at the FBO level to make sure that we're ready and have a system in place to handle this fuel once we actually have a 100 octane fuel. So that's kind of where we are today. Earlier this year, the FAA established a program called EAGLE, Eliminate Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions, and that is designed as an industry partnership to bring together the stakeholders here and many others to make sure that all that is in place and that we have a program to be able to move forward as quickly as possible. And while the public goal on that is 2030 to get all that done, I think everybody up here agrees that we'd all like to get it done sooner than that, and it really looks like it'd be possible to get that done as soon as possible. So With that as kind of a level set, let's get started. We got a lot to cover. Up here on the stage, we have some of the leadership from the EAGLE program, as well as some industry leadership who are supporting this. And I'm going to start out by introducing my former boss, AOPA President and CEO Mark Baker, to kind of kick things off. Mark?
Thank you, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Jack, for allowing me to host this very important, probably the most important issue facing general aviation today. I think we all agree on that. And one of the things that I want to continue to point out, that pulling this group of people together and yourselves is all about showing the industry is concerned, and we are not going to support lead as an alternative in the future. It needs to get the lead out. Just as Tom said, the elimination of leaded gasoline is the most important objective that we can all agree on. When you look at that banner up there and all the names and the companies and the businesses that are represented, are all the partners in this solution that we have to go through, whether it is ultimately a PAFI or an STC process. We're not here to protect or kind of pick one favorite channel or process. We're here to figure out how to get across the finish line as soon as possible, not wait until 2030. So I think if you leave here with one thing in mind, this industry is committed to moving forward to an alternative fuel as soon as possible with the best and most safe solution. We also know that we have issues as it relates to certain governmental bodies like out in Reed Hillview, where they've chosen to, on their own volition, not support the supply of 100 low lead, which we consider to be a huge safety issue and really puts at risk many of our airports if it starts to go down that slippery slope. So pulling our groups together, we want to assure the public that we're moving to a new direction, a new fuel as soon as possible that is a safe solution for all of our airplanes. So I'm going to introduce my partners in this, and most of you don't need to have Jack Pelton be introduced here. He's our host with EAA. I'll introduce Lirio in a minute here, but she'll be up here next. Jim Viola with the helicopter group. I think I can see Pete Bunce, wave, Pete. And Ed Bolin, who likes to run lots of jet fuel, but he's here anyway. And Karen Hugger, who is representing the NATA group, which will be here a little bit later today. They've all had flight problems getting here. But this is about getting everybody involved with going as fast as we possibly can go in a safe manner to transition away from low lead. You know, my partner in this is Lirio Liu. I'm the co-chair of the EAGLE program. And Lirio has most recently joined this CERT office, but has been around for a while with the FAA. And look forward to working with you, Lirio, on this. Come on up here, Lirio, and have a few comments about where we're headed and how fast we can go. Lirio.
Good morning. Is it still morning, right? Oh, no, it's still morning. Happy to be here. And actually, as was indicated, I'm new to this position. I've been in the position for about 2 months. But I started in aircraft certification about 31 years ago. And I'm happy to really be back to my roots as an engineer, and it's good to see. And I would say that since I've had the last 2 months, one of the biggest things that crosses my desk on a pretty much daily basis is this issue, and how do we transition, and how do we actually put the urgency behind that. So I look at this too. I mean, I started in the aircraft certification office in Los Angeles working GA, aircraft helicopter, and GA. So that's where my roots are. I'm not a pilot, but I've had a lot of exposure and love it. And it's a staple to what we do for the communities, and you see it. I mean, look at the enthusiasm that's here. And so I think we have to recognize that and make sure that we ensure that it continues to operate safely. And that is the reason why we are here today. We've talked about this transition. I've heard it a lot, getting out of leaded fuel for many, many years. And I think it's time to be done talking and really seeing more action done. We've had piecemeal work put together. And so the difference between what was been done with PAFI and what we've been doing with STCs is really bringing EAGLE together, because it looks at it holistically. You're going to see the 4 pillars that will support this, which is basically looking for the fuel, ensuring that we have the regulatory framework that actually implements it, making sure we have the infrastructure, and building out the community work together. So I'm pretty excited about being a part of this at the moment. It's a new experience to be up here in front of this crowd, but one of the things that we want to make sure, though, is we transition in a safe manner. And one of the things that we did in the FAA, and I know people have asked, what is EAGLE and what does it stand for, what it's going to be doing, what's different? I think we in the FAA, as a result of the Reauthorization Act 2018 realized we needed to take a look at this in a manner more comprehensively, and we had commissioned a National Academy of Science study in 2021 that came back and said what we needed, a multi-layer strategy to be able to look at this and address the fuels issues. I mean, we need to be able to do what we can within the infrastructure, as well as with the communication education. So it needs to have a full court press on it, which is the industry, the FAA, government, and even Congress involved, and that's what we've got. So that is really where you're going to hear more of the details of where Eagle is coming from. I'm here to really make sure that Eagle sets up doing the work, but also the framework so that we can get to success. So I know 2030 is aggressive. It is aggressive, but we've been talking about it a long time, so we're going to make it a reality. I would say myself, I'm, again, new to this position. I know there's a lot of activities going on, and I recognize the urgency, and I'm taking a real personal attention to make sure that we get to the finish line in some of those areas that are ongoing. So I think we'll turn it over, talk longer. I talk really fast, which means I work really fast, too. Turn it back to you. Yep.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you, Larry. So we have the support of the senior levels at the FAA, but there are people on the ground here doing actually the work. I'd like to introduce Robert, and he's going to take it over from, but he's been the CEO for the Centennial Airport in Denver, has been largely involved in a lot of things in general aviation across the country and different work groups. And Robert, can you come up here and tell us and introduce your partners here about how we're actually getting the work done? Thanks, Robert.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you also to Jack Pelton, our host. And why don't we have a round of applause for Jack and the EAA and the there's 5,000 volunteers here doing all the heavy lifting, and I'm one of those volunteers on this side with the Eagle program. So again, thank you. My name is Robert Oleslagers. I'm actually going to, no, wrong direction. So I'm recently retired. I retired in January from Centennial Airport after 21 years. Is this working? Neat. Can you hear me now? All right. Sorry about that. So Robert Oleslagers, I'm the recently retired CEO at Centennial Airport. Was there for 21 years. I've been managing airports for about 38 years. During most of that time at airports, believe it or not, I've been involved with a lot of air quality issues that frankly affected airports, anywhere from shutting down the airport because of air quality analysis, coming out of the California environment. That's always an issue, and so I had to deal with that. But also even just visibility extinction for space shuttle issues over at Edwards Air Force Base. So I'm kind of a volunteer and subject matter expert on these issues. I was involved in a 2013 study. That was the publication date. It was actually in 2011, 2012, on the first ACRP, or Cooperative Research Project, involving leaded study. Leaded fuel involved Santa Monica Airport and some, and then back again in 21, Ms. Liu already referred to that study. I was a reviewer on that. And it's an excellent study if anyone is interested. National Academies of Sciences put that out, and it's really a good overview of some of the issues that we're dealing with. So, as I said, I'm basically a subject matter expert, so I know just enough to be dangerous. I want to thank everyone for inviting me to speak to the Eagle program here at Air Venture 2022. And again, what you see here, the Eagle goal has been up here for a little bit. It's basically to eliminate leaded fuel from the United States by 2030. And I'll talk about some of those details here in a second. While also avoiding adversely affecting the current GA fleet and the expeditious and efficient operation of the fleet as it is today, and that includes the transition period. What that means is we want to make sure, absolutely sure, that 100 low lead will remain available until we have a viable, properly tested fuel out on the market. So, why have lead? Well, all of you, most, or at least I should say most of you would know that lead is a fuel. It's extra tetraethyl lead is really the additive. Prevents engine knock, but it also raises the octane levels, of course, but it is also a toxic substance, and there's a lot of literature already out there on that. But that is the main reason why, we have let in avgas, and secondly, why it has to be eliminated. So the question really is, why today, why now? 2030 is kind of our target date. You'll hear more about this in a little bit from Maria and others, Walter as well. The EPA is getting ready to do a draft endangerment finding that actually starts the regulatory process to, at some point, completely eliminate that. Generally, that takes roughly 6 to 8 years, believe it or not. It includes studies, hearings, public hearings, and the like, and sometimes involves litigation. And once we get the lawyers involved, it just gets stretched out. But it's a very serious issue that has to be addressed and will be addressed at some point. So what's next? So the 2030 is really kind of our target date for general aviation. That's really the dead stop, if you will, for having a substitute fuel. As Mark indicated and as Tom indicated already, if we can find a fuel substitute alternative sooner than that, all the better. And I know there's a lot of progress that has been made, including some of the programs that we have currently out there, including PAFI and the STC process. So I'm trying to find my notes here. So here are the 4 pillars that we're currently working on. Those are functional pillars. It's really a grouping of different types of activities that are all interrelated. I really call this an integrative process, from supply chain to R&D to the evaluation and testing of candidate fuels that are out there. And again, as I said, and as everyone will reiterate multiple times, we want to have a safe fuel supply alternative for 100 low lead at this point. And then finally, there's always the regulatory piece and policy and programmatic issues that come with this. It's not just as simple as we can portray this. Obviously, there's some folks that say, well, why don't you let just private sector run this program? I will tell you that the private sector, and this is really what is called a P3, a public-private partnership, the entire private sector, and many of them are here in the front row that are involved in this, both in the PAFI side as well as in the Eagle side. What's really the difference? So PAFI is the Piston Alternative Fuels Initiative is focused on a stakeholder process, whereas the SEC process itself is private, very proprietary, and that is driven by industry, whether it be trade secrets or otherwise. So it's not as opaque as either PAFI or the STC process might look like, but the main thing is to again find a suitable replacement for 100 low lead. As I mentioned, the EPA is getting ready to issue this endangerment finding by 2030. Our goal is really to get something sooner than that, and I think there's a lot of interest both from the aviation community, but frankly also from the neighboring communities around the airports. I've been managing airports, and the whole issue of air emissions sometimes are couched as really as noise issues around certain airports. We have to make sure that we have a distinction there, but because the concern with leaded fuel, the focus sometimes on noise has translated into an environmental issue where folks anticipate maybe a quicker action than on noise. So, and I've been dealing with noise issues for the entire time that I've been managing airports, but with the leaded fuel issues, that has come up since Santa Monica activists actually started to bring that up as a concern as well, and it's a legitimate concern, so we're continuing to focus on that. So let me talk a little bit about Eagle itself. It's an integrative process, as I said, that cuts across all 4 pillars. We will eventually have a senior coordinator that will be managing all of those pillars. We currently have 2 pillars, one on the what is the light blue side from the industry-driven side, and then the darker blue side on your right is mostly government-driven. But I can assure you that all of those things will be integrated, and we will work very closely. And when I say we, it's the Eagle program itself. And so I'm very excited to be kind of on the outside looking in as an SME. This is just very fascinating stuff. I had always hoped in retirement to actually do a little bit of work on this, and so it's an exciting time. One of the things that PAFI, or that Eagle does, which PAFI and STC do not do, and that is to integrate the entire process between all of the 4 pillars. And frankly, if there might be even a 5th pillar, and that is to communicate with you, the flying public, but also to communicate with folks outside of that area. So, as I've mentioned, the PAFI process is a stakeholder process. The OEMs are very much involved with it, and then the STC process is really a proprietary industry-driven process. So very different from each other, and Eagle really is not only trying to encompass all of those pieces, but we're trying to drive all of the pieces, literally from testing, evaluation, developing a new fuel, to taking it to the refineries, taking it to the terminals, and so on, and you'll hear more about that here shortly forthwith. So finally, we also have the government piece and the regulatory piece and programmatic pieces, which Maria will be talking about. So my father always said, if you can't be brilliant, be brief and be gone. So with that, I want to introduce Maria Di Pasquantonio from the FAA to talk a little bit about those pieces. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Robert, and welcome, Oshkosh. I must say this is my first time here at AirVenture, and I'm really excited to be here. You know, when you spend most of your days in an office or in front of a screen, and when you actually get out in the field and see aircraft and the people who operate it, it really is invigorating. So I'm happy to be here today. So I'm with the FAA, the Aircraft Certification Office, and I'm the manager for the research group as well as the Alternative Fuels Program. And I've been working with PAFI since I joined AIR a little bit over a year now. So I'm really pleased to be here today and again working with all my colleagues. Now, you've heard a lot already about, I think, things I was going to say, so I appreciate all the executive committee that have come before me, and Robert. We've kind of tried to set the stage for all of you in terms of what Eagle is and how it interacts. So just a couple things. So forgive me if I repeat some things you've already heard. We just really want to make sure that we're clear on our messaging, as we know there's been a lot in the press, and we just want to make sure that we're giving you the information that we have here today. Eagle is still developing. We're new. We're sort of eaglettes. You know, we sort of birthed Eagle this past February, and since then we've been developing the framework more. We've got our pillar leads and really working as a collaborative team. And so again, that's another area that I really see strength in, that we're working across government, working across industry, the associations, the community, to really bring Eagle to fruition. So I'm going to go through a few slides here. I wanted to show you here is we've got a number of things that we're working. Each of the Eagle pillars have identified outcomes. As Lirio said, we want to make sure that we have a plan and that we're sticking to schedules and we actually get to 2030. So we've all identified outcomes in our particular pillars. And you've heard earlier that 100 octane low lead, 100 low lead, 100 LL is the only leaded piece that remains today in our environment. And that's the fuel that operates all of your aircraft. So while it is still the only transportation fuel in the U.S. to contain lead as an additive, it improves performance. But on the flip side of that, as you heard from Robert, it actually has shown to have negative health impacts on individuals within the area of exposures, particularly those that live in and around airports. So the challenge we face today is not a new one, but remains a complex one, and that's to find a suitable replacement fuel for 100 low lead and do it in a safe and smart and efficient manner, and that's really what EAGLE is all about. So you see the four outcomes here, and you've heard again about PAFI, the Piston Aviation Fuel Initiative. And I know you've heard about it for quite a while, and it's true. We haven't found a solution yet, but I will say because of all the testing and the rigorous protocols we've been doing over the last 10 years, we really have learned a lot. And we've built all that learning into our current test protocols, and I would say we're certainly closer today than we've ever been, and we're certainly looking again to EAGLE to help push us over the finish line. I know you've also heard claims that, well, EAGLE, that's nothing new, it's just sort of PAFI reborn, but I'm here to say it really is not. PAFI is focused on the testing, the evaluation, the authorization of the fuels, but that's just one piece of this big puzzle. So EAGLE brings all those pieces together to help actually get the fuel produced, distributed, ensuring that there's quality control, and then getting it to the end point where all of you need the fuel to put into the tanks. So it really is a collective activity. And again, it's all of us, it's all of you, it's all the folks that we've identified up here behind us in terms of our stakeholders. And those have been folks that we've been trying to talk to as part of EAGLE. We've had a number of stakeholder sessions, and we've got 80 or so folks that have joined with us, and we're certainly welcoming and inviting many of you to participate as well. We know we can't do it alone. So the second outcome is really just, of course, related to the first, is identifying what that fuel that's acceptable for fleet use. And then once we have identified that, we certainly need to make sure that we can actually get it into the fleet. And through some reauthorization language that we've had over the last number of years, we're working on a fleet authorization process, and I'll share a little bit of the details with you. And then finally, Robert mentioned training. So we've tried to build into each of the pillars training, outreach, education, awareness to make sure that you're hearing from us all the activities that we're doing. And certainly this is a great opportunity to do that here today. So on this slide here, I mentioned that removing lead is really a complicated challenge. And so what I've highlighted here is, you see on the left the little seesaw there, the balance, that with today's current avgas, it's a very stable, it's a very known and stable chemical composition to make sure that the fuel properties actually meet the needs of the aircraft operational demands. And that's because of what Robert referred to, tetraethyl lead. Easier to say TEL or TEL, so I'll use that. But TEL has actually been added to avgas since 1921 to boost octane, to boost octane ratings and to prevent engine damage and knocking at higher power levels. And only adding a small amount of lead, and this is what my colleagues have showed me, it's just basically a Tylenol capsule of lead is the amount that's been added to the composition to actually increase the performance. So the challenge before us is we're sort of upsetting the apple cart there now. So we take lead out, so we're a little bit out of balance, and trying to find the right mixture of the fuel properties and the composition. It really is a bit science and chemistry and art and engineering and so forth. So it is a very complicated matter, and we certainly have a lot of subject matter experts that are working through our fuel offers to make sure that we've maintained that right balance. So we need to make sure that we can find those chemicals that'll provide those octane boosting components so we don't negatively impact your aircraft or the performance of those aircraft. So it's quite one of those hard problems, I would say. So here I mentioned, and you've heard from our colleagues here, we have basically two paths, and EAGLE does support both paths to fuel authorization. So you see up top the fleet authorization process, which encompasses PAFI testing. So the blue box and the yellow box is really the PAFI part of the program. But then we're looking to get an approval that is worked through our collaborative FAA industry approach and we're working a process to talk through the fleet authorization. So complementary to that, we do have the STC process that you heard, which is a normal supplemental type certificate that any manufacturers making any sort of design changes to their product does go through the certification process at the FAA. So that still is in place, and that is opportunities that a number of our colleagues here are taking to get those engine and aircraft approval. The difference, PAFI is actually looking at the fuel and then determining those aircraft and engines that can accommodate that fuel, whereas the STC is more focused on the product, so focused on the engine, focused on the aircraft, and then determining the fuels that can operate. So I sort of see it as an inside-out problem. So PAFI is really looking at from the inside out, where the STC process is really looking from the product side, from the outside in. But again, the message is that Eagle is all welcoming and all encompassing, and we're certainly, for those of you that are involved in any of those processes, we're certainly looking to see your fuel, to evaluate and to test it, because as you heard earlier, our goal is the same, is to find that fuel, that can replace the 100 low lead that you're all using today. So I mentioned we've got, again, this is just sort of a visual to show we've got two candidates that are working with us in the PAFI program, and those are highlighted on the boxes here. We've got the Afton Phillips 66 team and also the Lyondell Basel VP Racing team. And then we've got our Swift colleagues as well working through the GAMI and also Swift Fuels. So the challenge, again, to find the replacement fuel operating on the existing fleet is one where we have to make sure it's backwards compatible. So the fuel we have today needs to be able to operate on today's aircraft as well as those from decades before us. So that again is a number of the challenges that we face. And in total, I think there's about 220,000 piston engine aircraft out there. So it is big, it is massive, and again, it does take the community to kind of solve that problem. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes just to walk through a little bit more of the specifics on the PAFI, since that's something that, again, is more of a consensus approach. So we're working through our FAA's Technical Center in Atlantic City, New Jersey, who's doing the testing for us. We also work with colleagues, our OEM colleagues, to do some testing, and then considering potential other third-party testing as well in the future. And then from a regulatory approach, that's what you'll hear in a minute from me when I talk about this fleet authorization process, which we had some reauthorization language in 2018 that actually gave us the opportunity to design a process other than the traditional process, and that's what we've designed as part of that process. And so again, the main point about PAFI, it really is across the industry. We're working with our colleagues to develop test protocols collaboratively. And then again, we've got broad support across petroleum, the aviation industry, and we've got an objective collaborative body of experts that helps us do the review. So I mentioned this fleet authorization process, and I know this chart is a little hard to read, so I'll send my apologies there. But I just want to kind of show this is the part of the process where we've gotten a fuel, it's gone through the testing and evaluation, and now we want to make sure that we have identified the suite of aircraft and engines that can operate on the fuel. And so we've designed a process while PAFI's doing the evaluation, testing, and qualification of the fuel. This process will allow us to get it into the fleet. So there will be an active role for all of you, the owners and operators of the aircraft. So once we've identified the fuel, we're going to be working with our partners at Gamma, who will be designing some new placards that will have to go on the aircraft. There'll also be some updates to the flight manuals to accommodate the new fuel and so forth. We're going to issue an SAIB, which is a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, that will provide you with all that information going forward. But the message there again is this is where all of you will be engaged once we do and get that identified. So we're using a minor alteration process for those of you that might be familiar with the terminology, because it really doesn't involve any alteration to the aircraft or to the engine specs. So again, more to come on this. We're hoping to get out a policy statement soon for comment. So this is something that we want to make sure that we do have in place in advance. So again, once we do get those fuels, we're able to get them out to the fleet. And then my final slide, at least in this portion of the presentation, is just sort of the requisite milestone and schedule chart. You know, all program sort of management overviews have the requisite chart. So this is just to kind of show you where we are in PAFI, the tool fuels that we have undergoing. They are in the initial testing phase. We are actually today, we should have some new fuel arriving in Atlantic City that we're looking to test. So we're looking to complete this first phase by the end of this year. And then we will move on to our full-scale testing, which will include a broader suite of testing involving materials compatibility, performance and detonation, durability, propeller vibration, and then we'll actually do some additional ground and flight testing on a number of different aircraft configurations. So that was sort of at least the quick overview of what's happening in the fuel pillar. We have one of our other industry colleagues, Ryan Manner, who was feeling ill today and not able to join us. He's leading the supply chain and infrastructure and deployment pillar. But as a team, Robert is going to come back to the podium and deliver those remarks from Ryan. So I'll turn it back over to you, Robert.
Well, thank you, Maria. And Ryan sends his apologies. He's running a fever, and I'm very grateful that he's quarantining and not sharing with us. So he apologizes. So this is not my area of expertise. I don't even pretend to be an expert in this, but Ryan was kind enough to share his notes with me. And so I'm going to kind of read from the script, if you don't mind, and kind of walk you through the process. The good thing is Ryan put a lot of pictures up there, and I can relate to those better than words. So first point that he wanted me to make, and that's been reiterated several times here, is that we must maintain the availability of 100 low lead throughout the process. But that also requires that we work across all of the various pillars, and that we have a quality-focused fuel out there that is focused on clean, dry, meaning no water or contaminants in there, as well as meeting all of the ASTM requirements. Interestingly enough, and I'll show you a slide here shortly, of the entire process, really from the refining process all the way into your wing. They're covered by more than 100 ASTM standards. So you have to be assured that what you get into your aircraft is a safe product. So here's that eye chart. And you can, I hope you can see. And by the way, I see a lot of you taking pictures. All of these presentations will be made available. You'll, towards the end of the presentations, you'll have a slide that will have a number of websites where you can download these PowerPoint slides. So, but by all means, keep taking pictures. So this is where we have the current supply chain infrastructure for 100 low lead. From a refinery to wing, and including the fuel quality perspective. So currently in the United States, there are only 8 refineries that actually produce 100 low lead. And most of those are delivered either by water, rail, or truck, some by pipeline. And it brings up a really interesting issue, and that's, to me, that's an economic issue with respect to fuel. The annual consumption of 100 low lead, equates to about 2 to 3 days of fuel consumption by the automobile industry. So we have a real legitimate threat there too, is to make sure that the refineries and the oil companies out there still have a viable product that they can push out. And I think we need to remember that. It's a diminishing supply. We are getting fewer and fewer piston aircraft being flown in terms of the number of years, and AOPA can probably tell you exactly what those numbers look like, but it's been a declining market, and so when we are talking about having to make this change with a lot of R&D expenses associated with it, that is going to be an issue that we will have to address, and frankly, this particular pillar will be looking at that in terms of the economic viability. Next slide, and this kind of breaks down from refinery to terminal and then finally to airports, how all of that works. And as you can see here, the ASTM certified tanks and then going to the filters and ultimately getting distributed. So where do they get distributed to? To the terminals themselves. Currently there are, by best guess estimate, about 50 terminals in the United States. Most of those, again, are delivered by pipeline, rail, and truck. I know to Centennial Airport, we still operate with trucks. Incidentally, at Centennial Airport, our sales between avgas and jet fuel was about 10 to 1. Most of the large commercial airports actually have a lot of their fuel piped in, but I don't know of any general aviation airport, pure general aviation airport in the United States that actually has avgas piped in. So the terminals, as I said, these are the ones that handle the low lead, and most of it then gets distributed to the airports by truck. So here you have the airport, the truck delivery, etc., goes into either tanks or stays in at the smaller airports, and I've managed a number of my smallest airport ever had 11 based aircraft. We had a little convolt tank there, self-service. So it's always a challenge to get this to some of the larger airports. We have roughly 19,000 landing fields in the United States, 3,500 within the NIPIAS, the National Plan of Integrated Airports in the United States. So trying to get the delivery, and this is going to be one of the biggest questions, and neither the PAFI nor the STC process actually address some of these concerns, and that is the availability, so that you never ever have to guess where you're going to get your next fuel supply from when you're flying. And so that's going to be really important during the transition from 100 low lead to unleaded 100 fuel. And that's something that this particular pillar is very focused on. So with that, it's a really quick overview of how the supply chain actually works. It's a critical piece. Typically, we've always had fuel. I know at Centennial Airport during very busy times, we've actually run out of fuel because we can't get enough tankers in every day, and we literally have offloads every day at the airport. Lately, that seems to have become a bigger problem. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Walter, who can he'll do the deep dive on some of the technical issues. And thank you again for your attention on behalf of Ryan.
All right, well now I'm gonna say good afternoon. We've crossed over past noontime, so appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Walter DeRozier. I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Maintenance for General Aviation Manufacturers Association. And so collectively with our members and the producers of piston engines, piston aircraft, the maintainers and supporters of that existing fleet that exists out there today, plus the developers of all of our future products, we have a significant interest in ensuring the safe continued operation of that fleet of aircraft and those airplanes that you fly, as well as being able to develop the aircraft for the future. And one of the key areas that we're looking at in terms of a transition to a replacement fuel is some of the technical areas in terms of R&D. And so we talked a little bit about fuel development and fuel testing. There's a lot of work there and a lot of independent parties working on that and our assessment and evaluation of that. We talked about the importance of getting that fuel produced and distributed and available at the airports. What I'm going to talk about in the R&D pillar is we don't know what the properties are of these fuels yet. We're looking for that type of fuel that can be a complete transparent replacement and work in every single engine and every single airplane. But the possibility exists that it might not. And so there might be gaps. And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're proactively looking ahead at some of the technologies and some of the innovations in some of the areas necessary to ensure that we can facilitate that transition to an unleaded replacement fuel once we find a good fuel candidate by looking at what the potential portion of the fleet that still might be affected. Because our goal and our objective in PAFI is to have minimum impact on the existing fleet. So for some of those engines and aircraft, if the fuel does not work seamlessly for them, to understand what those gaps are, and as part of our program to start taking a look at some of the opportunities to mitigate those impacts and to enable you to continue to safely fly your aircraft regardless of what type of engine, what type of airplane it is. And so part of that is looking at addressing safety and technical challenges that might be identified. For the most part, we talk an awful lot about octane here, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about other potential areas that there might be impact. We're also looking forward. Future engines, future airplanes, future development, and some of the advanced work that's being done in research and testing of advanced technology designs to enable those products of the future. And as part of any technology, anything we try to bring into aviation, we're going to make sure that we also look at the aspects related to FAA certification, because that can be a real challenge and a real barrier to entry into market. And so part of looking at any of these is to consider that right up front as we evaluate them so that we can enable that deployment if it's needed. So in terms of what areas we're looking at, I talked a little bit about if it was a drop-in fuel, we focused primarily on the fuel itself and the fuel specifications and the fuel performance. The challenge we have in our aviation gasoline is it's not going to be a complete drop-in. Now what we'd like it to be is we'd like it to be transparent from the user, owner, operator perspective. So for you in the field, hopefully it's a complete drop-in. It'll be invisible and transparent. But before we get there, there's an awful lot of evaluation, assessment, testing, and analysis to make sure that it works across our entire safety infrastructure. And Robert talked about that quite a bit from the production, distribution, and availability aspect of it. There's a big portion of it that's evaluated as part of engines and airplanes and performance. But across all of those areas, the question is, if we have a fuel that looks like a good, viable fuel, but if there's some potential impact on portions of the fleet, how do we look at that? And so it really depends on the properties and the authorization of the unleaded fuel itself. So if we identify fuel that can be authorized for every engine and every airplane, great, we don't have any gaps. If we potentially have gaps, part of what we're going to look at is what are some of the areas that we can address those safety and technical challenges. A lot of those that we look at are going to be focused on the high performance engines and the use of the unleaded fuels, but there might be more impacts depending on the fuel properties, the fuel composition. So we focused a lot on octane detonation impact and what we can do to ensure the safe performance of our engines in the event that it doesn't have the same octane type of responsiveness that we get from 100 low lead today. But there's also the potential of different components in the fuels. And those different components, different chemicals, different constituents might have some materials compatibility issues. So if that's an area, that's part of what we'd be looking at in this activity. We might have an impact on some of the operational procedures, whether it's a cold start, whether it's operational aspect. What can we do to address those kind of gaps? We also have engine monitoring technologies available today that can help fill some of those gaps so we can manage and monitor the engine safety and engine performance, even if that fuel happens to operate a little bit differently. So all of this is to say that when we identify a potential candidate fuel, we look at the authorization of that fuel based on the testing, based on the certification of an STC, or based on the authorization and the fleet authorization. If there's any portion of the fleet that's impacted, that's not addressed, that this is the area that we'd be taking a look at what are the opportunities to maybe mitigate that and to provide some solutions to address that. Also looking forward, future fit in terms of future technologies is also taking a look at collaboration and R&D and testing of advanced technologies, advanced designs, facilitating product development for both current production engines and airplanes, for future production engines and airplanes. We also have FAA has already got some planned R&D programs in place. They are focused on enabling greater use of lower octane fuels and some of the alternate propulsion technology, so I was just going to acknowledge and recognize some of those. In there's an FAA R&D program that's taking a look at the types of technologies and modifications that might allow a fuel to be able to operate with an octane protection less than 100 low lead. So we might identify 100 octane fuel, but the actual performance responsiveness of the engine in the airplane might not have the same level of protection as 100 low lead. We've seen that in some of our testing. So the idea here is to have an understanding of some of these technologies, to do some of the developmental work and the focus on what they might be able to offer, how we can enable and facilitate those to be available in the event that they're needed. And so that work is something that would be started now. Now, once we identify some candidate high octane fuels, Once we identify whether there is any gaps or affected engines or not, we'd be able to take a closer look at how we can apply some of this in those areas to be able to ensure that you can continue to operate your existing airplanes and engines. So also looking forward to a broad range of different make model engines. How do we incorporate these technologies into production? How do we incorporate them into future type design? So certification is a part of evaluating and looking at these technologies and how we can enable that, and how we can enable that data is available to support certification, but also enable to support the ability to implement and deploy out in the field in an efficient manner if that's what's needed. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Maria to talk a little bit about how we're going to help engage in the regulatory and policy arena.
Thank you, Walter. So I'm back, and I'll be doing the cleanup round here, and also filling in for two of my FAA colleagues who actually are the facilitators or the leaders of this particular pillar, the regulation, policy, and programmatic activities. So, and that's Ralph Vanelli, who works in our Office of Energy and Environment, and William Reinhardt, who works in our Office of Airports. So I'll do my best to pretend to be them today. So what we've got, again, this is the outcome pillar that really just kind of highlights what are the main areas of focus for this particular pillar. So you've heard a number of times about the regulatory process for EPA. FAA, especially our Office of Energy and Environment, works very, very, very closely with EPA, and I know because I've sat in on some of these conversations, at least at a weekly or daily basis. So there's a lot of collaboration going on with them as this process matured. The second thing is to establish those policies that affect funding for airport fuel infrastructure. As you heard Robert talking about that, we want to make sure that as we go through this transition, that it is safe and that we do make sure that there are those fueling opportunities available for you so you're not stranded at an airport. We'll also be looking at other activities that reduce or eliminate reliance upon leaded aviation fuels. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, the one thing that we're all focusing on is training, education, awareness, and outreach. So back to our friends at the EPA. So one of the things we mentioned that they're on track to release their draft endangerment finding for lead emissions for piston engine aircraft. That is planned to be, the draft to be released in October of 2022, with the final proposal to be released a year later in 23. So this is just the first step in a long regulatory process that will involve not just EPA but FAA putting regulatory pieces together, and there will also be a public comment piece as part of that EPA announcement. So again, the message there is this is something that's not going to happen overnight. I think I mentioned earlier that the process typically can take 6 to 8 years, so it's very methodical. It's very much well defined, and we'll be working very closely again with those colleagues there. Again, all part of that making sure that we have a safe plan to transition to unleaded fuels. So again, the goal of Eagle in 2030 is to make sure that we're protecting all of you, the industry, to protect GA, to make sure that there is fuel with 100 low lead through the transition and ultimately to an unleaded future. So I wanted to focus for a minute on some things, and this is, I'm going to shift to my airport side now, focus on some things that can be done early on, even today, in terms of helping to mitigate some of the lead at airports. So airports and owners, we are looking to potentially have additional fuel types to facilitate the transition, increasing distance between pre-flight maintenance run-up areas and people on and off the airport, relocating those run-up locations or distribute run-ups to multiple locations, minimizing engine idle and run-up time, posting warning signs, and then promoting airport and pilot awareness. And I did want to acknowledge we have one of our colleagues on the front row here from NATA. We have Karen with us. I know we're starting an initiative with the FAA to work very closely with our partners at NATA to work to develop some training materials and videos and something. So I don't know, Karen, would you like to come up and highlight or use one of the mics to tell us about that work?
just come up briefly and let you know that we are working on resources that will be available to the entire industry for free on safe fueling practices when we're dealing with alternative fuels as well as traditional 100 low lead. Those free videos that we're working on with FAA will be available on our avoidmisfueling.com website. We're also updating modules to our subscription Safety First training platform for anyone who is a professional ground handler for training on working with multiple fuels. And we'll also be facilitating white paper and best practices for FBOs and airports who want to bring in an unleaded alternative and offer 2 types of fuel on their facility in addition to 100 low lead. So all of those resources are in development and will be available by the end of the summer.
Thank you so much. That was an on the spot, so thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen, appreciate that. But really the message was we wanted you to hear real time that there are things that are happening that you can all take advantage of in terms of learning more of those things that you can do today. So just sort of finally in conclusion here, so in terms of the transition, we see this as a gradual transition that's going to require accommodating more than 1 fuel types for the different piston engine aircraft. And again, you heard some of those mitigations that we can do. Today, there's really limited FAA authority to fund fuel infrastructure at non-primary airports, but we are pursuing some additional authorities to provide ground funding for airport fueling system. So again, our goal is through EAGLE is to make sure that we have a safe and smart transition to an unleaded future, and again, sort of welcome all of you figuratively and literally under the tent to work with us in terms of reaching that goal. So thank you all, and now I'd like to turn it back over to our moderator, Mr. Tom Haynes.
Okay, thank you all for that. A lot to unpack there for sure. But we only have one chance to get this right. So I don't want to put my family in an airplane fuel with a fuel that we don't have 100% confidence in. And so if it takes a little bit longer to test some of these fuels and to come up with a workable solution for the entire GA fleet, I want to get it done quickly, but I also want it to be done right and safely. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for all of us today. So we want to take some questions. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions based on things I've heard from you all and conversations and the things I've seen on the forums, and as a GA pilot and aircraft owner myself. And the one thing I've seen is what's happening in California, how frustrating it is that we've seen airports out there, like at Reed Hillview, for example, removing 100 low lead and allowing only the 94 UL fuel, which is great for those with low compression engines, but for those of us with higher compression engines, just not an option. And it also introduces somewhat of a safety risk for those who may not be aware and actually end up with the wrong fuel in their airplane. So my first question would be to either Maria or to Lirio would be, what can the FAA do to prevent other airports from eliminating the availability of 100 low lead at their airports?
Is it working? Is it working?
There you go.
It is. Okay, so it is actually something that's bigger than aircraft certification, but it is an FAA, and we're all together. Like Maria indicated, we're working with our airports organization. There are things that we can do through the grant program for limitations if they end up taking any grants, so that they have to provide the fuel, because safety is the main mission. Certain states and certain airports will take their own initiatives, but there are actions and enforcement that we may be looking at as consequences. So I can't say that aircraft certification has a direct impact on that, but FAA-wide, it's consciously being looked at, trying to work with the authorities that we can within the responsibilities we have. Yeah, nothing else?
Okay. So another question, this probably maybe for Pete or Walter. Many in the GA community, including some here in this room perhaps, are wondering if EAGLE supports the STC path. They say EAGLE is only concerned with the PAFI process, and so just can you give us a little more context on where the role of the STC process in there, and maybe Lirio or somebody would have comment on that as well. You want to grab that?
Tom, I think I'll start just, you saw in the slides, there's two pathways. We're supportive of it. In fact, representing the manufacturers, as I do very proudly, we defend the STC process to the hilt because that has to exist for our industries to survive. So we want, you know, and GAMI and SWIFT are currently going through the STC process. We want to be able to facilitate that so that once they get through that STC process, we can somehow get through to an industry consensus standard, whether that's ASTM or whether that's something else, so that we can have the fleet-wide authorization that takes place for all of us to take advantage of. So we're fervent supporters of the STC process. There's been, I think, a lot of misreporting out in the press that, you know, one, that there's some alternate universe that people live in to say that the association wanted to perpetuate the length of this process long, which I'm sitting there going, we're spending big dollars of our members' dues, whether it's Jack, you know, you all members of EAA, AOPA, my membership, we're spending big bucks trying to work this problem. There's also been criticism, well, there's taxpayer dollars being spent. I go, well, hell yeah, there is taxpayer dollars being spent. We go and lobby for those extra dollars. Why should the sustainable aviation fuels, to take care of the turbine guys, get a whole bunch of appropriations from the United States Congress to fix the jet fuel problem, and we don't get any support out of Department of Energy and others that can help us to be able to solve this gigantic problem? You saw all the tentacles that are out there just on the fuel distribution system in that. So yes, there are federal dollars that are going for that, and what we all work together for is to be able to adequately fund that each and every year to be able to plus up the FAA's budget, because they have to be able to test. And then our manufacturers are spending a whole bunch of in-kind dollars to be able to do testing. So they're providing engines, they're providing airframes to do what Walter talked about with the materials compatibility testing. So there is an awful lot of money having to be devoted toward this whole effort.
All right.
I'm happy to add something here too. What I think has been good in the presentation, it's clear there are multiple pathways, and the STC process is, of course, one of those that's pretty valuable. And I like the way that Maria put it. It's an inside-out or outside-in way to go. I think Eagle provides some assurance for those that are working on the STC process that what we're looking on is from the aircraft and product perspective, and then the other concerns that are being done through the R&D are being addressed through the Eagle, so that you're going to have a comprehensive approach. So what I think it does, it gives the engineers working on the STC the assurance that what they're looking at is that compatibility part that's within the realm of their scope, and then there is the Eagle that can help support it actually getting into implementation with the resources that are available. So I appreciate what you said there.
Okay, thank you. Well, Mark and Jack, most everybody in this room is a member of one or both of your organizations, representing the vast majority of people who own general aviation airplanes and fly general aviation airplanes across this country and really in a lot of cases around the world. So I get this question all the time from somebody whose engine is coming up on overhaul. It's like, what do I do? Should I spend the money on an overhaul, or do I turn this thing into some sort of a doorstop because of a fear that we're not going to have a suitable fuel going forward? Are we actually going to get there?
There's no doubt in my mind we're going to get there. This is really just about when. So I would certainly be continuing to overhaul my engine. I'd certainly keep flying. We're going to make sure, as the associations and working with the FAA and with Congress, is that we get a path to keep 100 low lead in place until this happens. And that's what we heard early on, and that we're going to fight very, very hard for. And at the same time, we're going to encourage that we get these other types of fuels a path to get them certified so that we can get somebody to produce them and get those. I mean, it's encouraging. You can get Swift 94 right now. So we'll see more of that as we move on. Mark?
I spent over $60,000 on my 550 for my 185 last year, so I hope so. I feel very confident we're going to be with a fuel that'll be a good, safe alternative very soon.
All right. Okay, let's go out to the audience now. Eric here has a microphone, and we are asking for questions, not statements. So Eric will get around to. We do have to wrap this up because we've only got a few more minutes before the next session starts. So, yeah, and if you could identify yourself, and if you're with an organization or a company, then just let us know who that is as well.
Hi, I'm one of those affected pilots at San Martin and Reed Hillview. And as of January 1st, I cannot buy fuel for my aircraft, and there are hundreds of other pilots there who cannot buy fuel. And we have to go a minimum of 20 nautical miles away or go to one of your reliever airports at San Jose to get fuel. So we're wondering, we know that the FAA is presently actively working to get this done, but we haven't seen any traction yet occur. So we're wondering, and this goes back to the fuel. We understand there are STCs presently in existence that'll take from R2800s all the way down, and including the aircraft they're mounted in. When can we get those approved? So if those counties will not allow us to have 100 low lead, that we can at least have some alternative at our airport.
I think Mark will also have something to add here, but let me answer the SDC part first. I've had a lot of active conversations with the applicants, and I really appreciate the candidness. I will say it's been 2 months that I've been in here, really going through the history of what's been happening. I see it's an imperative that we actually lead a clear path to get to the end point. So that's not something I'm allowed to perpetuate. It's not going to be the history repeating itself. I'm not going to put a date on it, but I will say that it's got my full attention, it's got the attention of my staff, and I will be working with them to be sure that we're accountable in a timely manner. So it's definitely somewhere clear on the horizon, I'd say.
It's a great question, because I used to be at San Martin, as you know, and it's a long ways to go get fuel, and it's a huge safety risk. So we're trying to use every lever we have from an association, legally and legislatively, if we have to find ways to make sure we protect the supply of 100 low lead until there's a safe alternative that's been recognized through either STC or PAFI to get in place. So we are going to take every effort we can to try and do that. But I'll also tell you, in Northern California, as you know, it ain't easy.
All right. Next question, Eric.
My name is Mike Hardison. I'm a 182 driver and basically just one of y'all. And I've heard a lot of stories from the guys at GAMI, the fact that they've got supposedly 100 octane ready to go in drop-in replacement on any engine that you can come up with. And I didn't see them anywhere at all on the PAFI milestone chart. I'm just wondering, where are they in the PAFI testing? From what I have read, these guys are really, really close. They're closer than what I've seen up on the charts. Is that something I don't understand? What am I missing here?
I can. So I can talk to the PAFI one. As we said earlier, there are two paths, and the PAFI is the broader collaborative approach where we're working with colleagues here. So in terms of so that strictly was a PAFI chart. So you're right on that. But the STC is moving along at its own sort of schedule and pace. But obviously, as Liria pointed out, we're certainly working with the applicants to make sure that we're all working towards the same goal. We're looking for a viable candidate, 100 unleaded, fuel. So it's they're following their own paths at this point. But we're looking for a winner.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. Larry Epstein from New York, just a pilot like everybody else here, or most of the people. So it's pretty clear that there's, from your charts and the discussion, that really there's only room for one product in the end because it's just too small a market. And ultimately, we're not going to be able to have multiple different fuels that we can market successfully. I mean, you've said it in multiple places, and you have two companies up there, two different groups. They're sort of racing each other, and then you have all these things that have to happen afterwards. So assuming one of those get there first, they're going to get it. But it seems to me that if there's a fuel out there that already is a drop-in replacement, that has already been tested on every engine and every airframe, that why not skip all that, save all the taxpayer money, save all your time, all your engineering, and then start later on in that process, and let's get it all done.
So the statement you just made, every aircraft and every airplane, been tested on every aircraft and every airplane. Walter, how many did we figure out? How many aircraft and engine combinations are there out there? Thousands upon thousands. Do you really think that's been tested that way? Okay. So don't think that on the STC process, which again we support, I'm hoping that we have multiple fuels out there. Competition is good. Avgas is already too expensive. We need to drive down the cost. We want multiple companies to succeed. The key is going to be having the refiners be able to refine it. We need to identify refiners all over the country that are willing to produce the fuel. They have a liability chain that they have to be able to go through. You have to have the manufacturers that are satisfied with the fuel, because in this litigious society, they're the first ones that are going to get sued, is the manufacturer, whether it's the engine manufacturer or whether it's the OEM. You don't just flip a switch whenever the FAA, and they're going to get it done, they're going to get the STCs done, but we have to make sure.
Why not just pick up where they already are? Why start where you just show these guys are just at the beginning? So if these guys haven't finished yet, that's fine, but pick up from there and go.
Exactly. And there is a pathway that's being built for where the STCs, they get the STCs, they're able to filter in so that there is transparent testing. Remember, the STC is a very proprietary process. George and Tim and Chris DaCosta over at Swift, they've got their secret sauce. They're working on it. But at some point, we have to get that into a process that is transparent to all of us. Exactly what Tom said. We're not going to put our families into something that we don't know that the engine manufacturers and the OEMs stand behind, and everybody feels comfortable, and that materials compatibility doesn't make you go broke because you've got to be able to go and switch bladders or anything else. We've got to check that. The other thing we have to check is making sure that all the chemicals that are in whatever these formulations are don't put us in this situation 10 years from now that anybody that's refueling one of these aircraft, all of a sudden they got a carcinogen in one of the chemicals, so it's got to pass the European Chemical Agency test. We've got to run it through processes here in the US, so we don't have that. So what we're trying to say is there's so many different moving pieces into this. We're all committed to both STC and the PAFI process, but we've got to make sure it is safe ultimately in the end.
Joe, right here.
I guess I'm not allowed to have the mic. That's crowd management.
No, you're not. We know you.
Yeah, Joe Brown, Hearts and Propeller. Obviously, I don't have a dog in the fight as to how we keep our airplanes flying. I just want our airplanes to fly. But to the STC guys, you know, I do that for a living as well. I don't do it in fuel. The problem I have is we also run our local airport. So we sell gas. And I've been trying to figure out, and I think you mentioned this, Pete, if an STC fuel is adopted by a pilot at some point, applicable to their N number, then I have to assume they exist in order to commit to putting that fuel in my tank. I have to assume there's enough of those STC holders to come to my airport to buy my fuel. And in the meantime, if I make that switch, nobody that burns 100 low lead is going to be able to buy gas from me. They're going to have to go somewhere else. So this long-term distribution thing wasn't solved by the first round of PAFI because no obvious fuel appeared that could be a drop-in. So now we're considering a second round of PAFI type fuels versus the STC. If these STCs are successfully adopted and can be sold to a pilot, how the heck do the airport guys deal with this transition? That's my question.
I'll start. It's a great question. I'll start, and I think I'll pass it to the rest of the group and maybe the other co-chairs, because I think that's the intent of having Eagle program, because we can look at just the fuel aspect. And when you did say it's PAFI versus STC, it's not. It's just two pathways. Intensive resources are given to both, but you can't just do a fuel on its own, and you can't even do just an STC on its own. You've got to have the infrastructure around that. That's what we found, because you can see, as you just indicated, you get an approval, but you got to have a way to ensure that it's going to be available. And how do you do it consistently? So it's an open-end process. If we go one down, we're trying to complete it through the Eagle program to bring it all together. Someone else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can just repeat that at NATA we are studying this issue very seriously, and we're going to be assembling all of the best advice and best practices, both for airports but also for private businesses that run FBOs and provide fueling services. We'll also be looking for any kind of funding for airports and maybe for FBOs and private businesses as well, or private investment where it makes sense to invest in secondary infrastructure or temporary infrastructure if it's economically viable. I mean, that's the other thing. This needs to be economically viable for aviation businesses as well as for end users. So those are all things that we're trying to assemble and get you all resources to look at those dynamics.
And I would only add, Joe, that I think it was last week we were all talking with the FAA about whether there's some modifications in the AOPA program that can allow a fuel truck to get federal dollars to be able to have a fuel truck on the airfield. Right now, you're not allowed to spend federal dollars if it is a fuel truck itself. So in this transition, we may be able to do that, and I think the FAA has been willing to take a look at that with us, and we may need some federal, the Congress may have to be able to tell us that, yes, that's okay to do.
Walter? Hey, Joe, I just wanted to, whoa.
You're on.
So I think you just highlighted, I think, one of the really important aspects that us together as stakeholders under Eagle are really important in terms of coming together. We spent a lot of time talking about the different pathways for fuel. We're interested in any good, safe, viable alternate replacement fuel. I don't care if it's being done with independent proprietary testing by somebody coming through SCC and they're getting their authorization for a large number of engines and aircraft, or if it's being done through a fleet authorization testing program under PAFI. But ultimately, a big part of Eagle is that bigger process of, once we have identified a good, viable candidate fuel, to bring all those stakeholders together, to get behind the fuel, to get buy-in from the stakeholder community, and how do we help facilitate and advocate for that deployment in an efficient and viable and reasonable manner. And that's going to take, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in that. And so the idea of Eagle is bring that all together. Let's identify what that best fuel is, no matter which way it gets tested and brought in. But once we know what that fuel is, that's where we really need all the stakeholders to come together, get behind it, advocate for it, find out the most efficient, effective way to get it out.
Okay, we are out of time, past our time actually, so thank you everybody for your rapt attention, your great interest in this very important subject, and a round of applause for the folks up here who are really working hard to make it happen.